This is the Next Bite of Life podcast, the place to be to hear personal stories from expats, digital nomads, and everybody else taking their next bite of life. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Next Bite of Life podcast. My name is Kem Kem. Today, my guest is David Tepfer. Now, David is an American in Paris, and he's here to tell us all about his journey there and on his new book, because now he's an author. He's got a book by the name of Shikoku, after the island. So I'm looking forward to hearing all about that book. Say hello to everyone, David.
Hello, hello. Greetings.
How are you doing?
Okay, greetings from gloomy Paris.
Ha! Gloomy. Ooh.
It's
Now
been
tell
raining.
me, oh, it's raining. Oh, no. Okay,
It's
that's
raining
terrible.
and it's mostly shut down. It's really pretty sad.
Ugh, I know. It's like this year is just a continuation. Everybody was like, oh, I hope 2021 is going to be much better, but it seems like it's just going to be, rinse and repeat.
Yeah,
What can we do, though?
it's
Just have to
it's
hang in there.
no, it's a new life we have to accommodate.
It's true. It's very true.
And there's
Now,
no
David,
travel.
tell me. Yeah,
There's no
there is
travel.
absolutely. I mean, I thought I was going to miss it a lot more than I actually do, by the way. I was like, oh my God, I got to travel. And then this happened. I'm like, you know what? I'm okay being, I'm
Well,
okay being at home for a little while.
no airports, no jet lag.
Yes. Now tell me, David, um, you grew up in Oregon. How
That's
did you
right.
end up in Paris?
Well, that's a very interesting story. My father was a professor, and he took us all on sabbatical leave when many years
Ah,
ago. This was in the
oh,
and to Paris. And so we went from a small university town in Oregon to Paris, and this was Paris in the 1960s, which is a
oh,
very different
wow.
place, a very different place. And it was truly a different world. There was just no connecting or comparing the world that we knew. I'm talking about my parents and my three brothers that we knew in Oregon with
Yeah.
what we discovered in Paris. And we all became addicted and we all kept coming back. And my wife, Becky, she was a singer. She wanted to sing in Europe. And so at one point in my development, I was a postdoc. I was after my PhD and I was doing research. She said, let's go to Europe. And my father said, well, I'm doing another sabbatical. So we all ended up in Paris together for a year and thought it would be a
Ah,
year, but it was extended. And Becky got a job at the opera. And so it just went on. And
wow.
we had a son. And that's a lot of years that just flashed by.
Wow. So you're
But it,
actually Parisian. You're not even, American anymore at this point because you
no,
spent so much time there.
yeah, I have mixed feelings about America, but it's very complex.
Yeah.
But the one good thing about living in France, one major thing for the subject of this interview is that we get long vacations, and
Yeah.
we're encouraged to spend this time with family. So it's a complete break from work. And
Wow.
so year after year, we would take a trip for a month or sometimes 6 weeks, and
That's
it
amazing.
became a way of life, and
Yeah.
really cemented our family because these were travel adventures. And looking back on all those years, those are the things we remember. It's
Yes.
the shared adventures.
It's true, huh?
Yeah,
It's true what they say. Nobody ever says something like, "Oh my God, I wish I had spent much more time at work." It's always like the memories of the places you visited and,
that's right.
bonding with family.
Bonding with family. That's right. And I believe in adventure. I think that's what it makes us communicate in a very
Yes.
fundamental way. And
Now,
when you're lost in travel, which is often the case, this is before telephone, so you couldn't figure out where you were or where you're going to sleep.
exactly.
And and and
Paper
we
maps.
and we never liked to plan things ahead. It was all spontaneous, and
Yeah.
so that meant that you just have to work together. You have to communicate in very fundamental ways.
Oh, that's amazing.
And so the
Now,
telephones are wonderful, but they solve a lot of problems instantly. But they also disconnect you.
yes. I saw pictures of like people, on the subway, and this whole picture, every single person was reading on the cell phone. Nobody was looking at each other. They were all
Yeah.
faces down. And it's kind of sad because, the internet is great for a lot of things, but unfortunately it's taking away from that time to connect with people, which is really what it's all about. And it's kind of sad.
And when you see a young couple on their honeymoon in a fancy Parisian restaurant and they never look at each other for an hour,
Jeez.
they never look at each
Oh,
other. They're on their phones or communicating through their
oh,
phones. That's a
oh.
that's a disaster.
Yes, it is. I don't
So,
know how we're going to change
oh,
that.
that's an unchangeable now, but
Yeah,
there are ways to mitigate it, and that's part of I think what I have to say to young people. That is, you
yeah,
have to disconnect from the electronics and reconnect in to people in a very
yeah.
personal way, and that's a reason for travel. It
Yes,
still is a challenge, particularly if you don't take a tour and if you don't let yourself get booked ahead and you just wander. And that
you
means you
always
have to have
wonder.
time. It takes time to do that.
Yes,
And so
yes.
these long vacations in France were promoted this adventure uh, connection and method of travel. And some people are
Mhm.
naturally like that. Some people aren't. But it's something you can learn.
Yeah. And I know that cycling for you is a passion, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Lots of these trips, most of them, in fact, were bicycle trips, and so we
W-
ended up going very obscure places, like a month in Cuba and
Wow.
Ecuador and Easter Island, New Zealand, Taiwan, but
Wow.
mostly in France. Just continuous cycling in France every
Yeah.
weekend, almost, but a great deal of it in Japan.
That's
Major
fantastic.
trips in Japan, and Japan. This was some years ago, as I say, before telephones, and Japan was
Hmm.
really high adventure because finding
Yeah.
lodging in the countryside of Japan when you don't speak Japanese and nobody speaks
Was it a little
anything.
challenging?
It was actually great fun.
Oh,
It was a
yeah.
continuous challenge. And my wife Becky had something about her that attracted the Japanese. She might have had some Asian ancestry. I'm not sure, but there's something they would come
Ah,
to her. But the Japanese are
okay.
also very, very concerned about gaijin, the foreigners, and they don't want
Oh,
them to have a bad experience. And so they see that you're
ah,
lost, and they will come to you and ask you if they can do something for you, but they say it in Japanese. And so you sit there and you stare at each other, and we learn just a few words like room for two, right?
yeah.
Or we like Japanese food. And
Yes.
that was enough. And then people would take us by the hand and they would show us where we could sleep.
Oh, that's so great.
But
That is so great.
and the Japanese don't do things spontaneously. Like when they travel, they plan everything down to the last minute.
Yes.
And so when they
Yes.
see these two gaijin on their
Uh-huh.
bicycles out in the countryside, sometimes tired and wet and hungry and all of that, they're concerned, and so they really want to make it work. And
Oh,
so
that's amazing.
they would come to Becky, and I would just sit in the background. And
Yeah.
sometimes when I really thought there was just no chance of getting out of this, uh, someone would show up. And
And just be
one time in
helpful.
particular, it was night was falling, and we couldn't get anybody to talk to us. It just wasn't working,
Yeah.
and night was falling, and we had actually gone to this town because we thought there was a youth hostel there, but we'd gone by it and it looked completely closed, and it was on a mountain above the town anyway, and
Wow.
we were it was dark by then, and
Oh.
we were in front of a shopping center, and the shopping center was closing, and a guy showed up in a strange uniform, a man, an older man, quite old in
Yeah.
fact, and he asked us in excellent English if he could help,
Oh,
and we
he
said,
must
"Oh
have been
yes, yes, we
relieved.
need lodging." But it turned out that his English was memorized English that he learned at some point, and he couldn't understand what we were saying. But
Oh.
eventually he understood that we needed lodging, and so he got on a telephone which was inside the shopping center, and tried to find lodging for us with no success whatsoever. And eventually I said, and the youth hostel, he said, oh yes, the youth hostel. I said, but it's closed. You can make a symbol in Japanese for closed. And he
Hmm.
said, oh no, it's open. It's open. Go back to the youth hostel. And
Oh,
we had a hard time finding a youth hostel. It was dark by
yeah.
then. But as we started climbing, the last turn sends you up a big hill. And climbing that hill, we heard honking and lights flashing. And we looked down, and there was a bus, a city bus going by. And it was the driver of the bus was this
Oh,
man. And
oh,
he had stopped on his between two bus trips to help us, and then he'd
oh,
gone back and made his round, and he just happened to be there when we made that last critical turn, and he was expressing his happiness that we had
that you
found the
found
youth
it.
hostel. And so we
That's
had no
amazing.
idea he was a bus driver. He just had this strange uniform with a flower in his
Yeah,
hat.
that's
So
amazing. I find the helpfulness is still there. I had a
yeah,
chance to I had a chance to visit Tokyo about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and
yeah,
we got lost. I remember one time we were in the subway, and you know how
that's
the
impossible. It's
stations, yeah, they're so huge though. We went out the wrong exit. Like we were
of
supposed to get
course,
out,
yeah,
like,
yeah. You
and
come out on a different planet.
yes. So, and this guy just saw us, and he's just like, "What are you doing?" And we're just like, "We needed to go here, the exits." I showed him the thing, and I swear he walked like a mile with us. He had to make sure
Yeah,
that we got to the right place. And I'm
it's
just
the
like,
same story.
yeah, that's amazing. It's just wonderful. I mean, the culture is great. And you sometimes wish everybody in the world could be that accommodating, but
But not all the Japanese are like that. Sometimes,
no,
the Japanese see us and they run. They run. They actually
really.
run. Oh, they're
Why?
terrified of us. They're afraid that they know they can't speak English, and they're afraid to get into something they can't handle.
Oh,
And they're very embarrassed.
oh,
They're just embarrassed, and their reaction is to run because they don't. They're embarrassed because they don't know English. It's a personality thing. Some people will always be
wow.
welcoming, and that's true everywhere we've traveled. That's true in
True.
Cuba. That's true in even in Norway. You find this dichotomy in people's reactions to you.
I'm just like the opposite. I try and I just start off saying, I don't know anything, and I make motions and all that stuff. But
Yeah,
it's hard, but it's, to me, that's part of the fun of traveling, isn't it? To get to know
absolutely.
people.
Yeah.
And
And
I
one
have to,
time,
I have to, oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, please.
No,
No,
just
no, no. I want to
another
hear your
on
story.
the same vein. In on the northern island of Hokkaido in Japan, we
Hmm.
spent at least a month, and it was early spring. There was still snow around, and at one point we had bought bentos in the local convenience store, the lunch
Hmm.
boxes, and we were having our
Hmm.
lunch. But we were on the beach, and it was cold, and there was a wind, and we got behind something, a wall or something, to get out of the wind, and we saw people in the surf in waders, and they were doing something very strange. We couldn't figure it out. It turns out they were collecting kelp that was washing up, because kelp is used to
Oh,
make it's the basis for a Japanese soup. And
oh,
so they these people saw us and we saw them, and we started walking toward each other just sort of spontaneously. And it was a
yeah.
man and his wife, about our age, and they were just couldn't figure out who we were or what was going on, and they were just incredibly curious, and so were we. And so
Exactly.
we walked toward each other, and then we just stood there smiling, and no one could say
Mm.
anything at all. And it lasted
But
minutes. And finally,
wow.
we waved goodbye and went back to our us eating our lunch, and they were went back to their kelp collecting. But
And it
it was a poignant moment because I had the feeling
mm,
afterwards that we had communicated more in that
exactly.
silence than we ever would have if we had been talking and doing the usual chat.
It's true. I was going to say, here you are years later, you still recall it. And I bet it's the same on the other side. When they go and
It
tell their
probably is.
stories, they still remember that part.
Yeah.
And that's quite a connection. It's great.
And the mystery of it, the unsolved mystery of
Yeah.
it.
They're like, maybe they thought they were stealing kelp and you thought something else, but it fires your imagination.
That's right.
Now, would you say Japan was probably, well, you live in Paris, so I assume, you know, your favorite country. Am I right in assuming that it's France, or would you say Japan
No,
had
I
a
don't
slight
have,
edge?
it's, I don't have a favorite country. But it's a good question,
Ah,
but I don't have an answer because my favorite country is where I am.
yeah,
And
that's great.
it really makes no difference. And had very good experiences in Morocco, for instance, which is totally
Ah,
different.
yes.
Uh,
Chaotic,
no,
as
Morocco.
opposed to the order that's in
No,
in
no,
Japan.
Morocco is not chaotic at all. It's
No,
very well organized. In fact, it's less chaotic than France, to be honest.
really.
Oh yeah, it's a very
Ah,
is structured and organized. It's not as structured as Japan, but the structure in Japan has large holes in it. There's a large part of Japanese culture which resists that influence.
huh.
It's that that perceived that perceived regimentation in Japan is probably
Hmm.
based on it's very Asian. It's probably based on the fact that until quite recently, most population was very poor and they were peasants.
Yeah.
And to survive, they had to produce rice. And the rice was
Okay.
not a commodity. It was produced locally. It was
Yeah.
not a commodity you could buy and sell. And if you
Yeah.
missed a rice harvest, you had famine.
Mm,
And to produce the rice, villagers got together. They federated under a leader or a committee of leadership, and they had to make major decisions, life threatening decisions about when to plant, when to harvest.
yeah.
And so to this day, there are many remnants of that. There's a special day in Japan where they drain all the canals, and
Hmm.
everyone goes out and they clean the canals, for instance. So there's a high
Wow.
level of cooperation in Japan, probably based on the rice culture.
And why do you think that Morocco is not chaotic? I mean, I've only been to Marrakesh, so I can't speak for the whole country,
That's a
but I
good
thought it
question.
was rather chaotic, kind of like Nigeria. But
Uh,
maybe it was just my perception.
yeah, all the travel we've done there has been very smooth using public
Mm,
transportation, and
okay.
people have been very welcoming. And the road system there is quite good, and people don't speed. For instance,
Hmm.
you just don't, because the police will stop you. They're
Yeah.
everywhere,
Yeah.
and the roads are good. Transportation is good. The agriculture there is very efficient. It's very well organized. It's largely wheat based. They grow wheat.
Hmm.
I think the Moroccans eat more bread than anybody else, they're very high on the list of products of consumption of products of wheat. The fruits and vegetables are excellent. The citrus fruits are just incredible in Morocco,
Yes, that is very true.
and
I absolutely love the food there.
things are clean. It's very clean, and the feeling there's the local infrastructure and community structure is very strong. It's not exactly regimented. It is a monarchy, but it's a benevolent monarchy.
Hmm.
Um, I think that it's still connected to the pre-industrial revolution.
Yeah.
A lot of the farming is done by donkeys instead of tractors,
Wow. So
and
it's still old school.
yeah, old school, but maybe new school,
Yeah. Oh
because
yeah. Maybe we should go back to old
well,
school.
I think we might have to seriously consider that. And
Yeah.
if I were planning for the future, I would be raising donkeys, breeding
Yeah.
donkeys. Uh,
You see, people listening to this, did you hear that? That's some advice right there.
we have to undo a great deal of the chemistry, referring to your
That's
name,
true.
that
That's very
the
true.
industrial revolution, which has brought us a lot of wonderful things, but also a lot of degradation of the environment, and we can't go on like that. So
No, we can't. And I
living
think we're already feeling some of the effect of that now, and it's time to like do something or start doing something. Otherwise, the next generations are not going to have much, are they?
well, the cities will the coastal cities will all be flooded.
Yeah.
The high waters will come all the way to Paris, probably. New York will be
Yeah.
underwater.
Yeah.
And the models for global warming and its effects are always way too optimistic.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
we have to plan for a worst case scenario,
Yes, we
and
do.
we've already, in a year and a little bit, we have seen a complete reversion of many of the things we thought were important. The cultural life in France, which,
True.
particularly in Paris, which was extremely active, just truly unbelievable, is basically wiped out. There's nothing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the performing artists have no jobs. They're
Yeah.
protected. Most of them are protected by the government for as long as the
Yeah.
government can continue to help them. But the theaters are closed, the opera's closed, the ballet is closed, and everyone's trying to
Yeah.
go digital. But so we lost our travel,
Yeah.
as we said earlier, and
Yeah.
so we have to now, I think, enjoy local adventures.
Yes.
I recently went to the Canary Islands.
Oh, how was that?
I absolutely loved it. I can't figure out how I missed it. I think I missed it. I missed it because people weren't talking about it. But I heard people.
Yeah.
I've known we've known quite a few people who have sailed the Atlantic, and they all say great things about the Canaries. I said
Yeah.
Canaries, Azores. I meant to say
Yeah.
Azores.
Oh,
Excuse me,
the okay.
the Azores. So it's a stopping place on the transatlantic sailing route, and
Yeah.
there are 9 islands in the Azores, and it's unsung, but it's actually fantastic tourism. And since it's in
Wow.
Europe, until
Yeah.
just a few weeks ago, Europeans could still go there without any problem. There's very little
Yeah.
virus there,
Yeah.
and it's Shikoku, the novel that just
Yes.
was just published, is the first of four, and
Oh.
it's a series with the same characters, and
Oh,
the
that's great.
and the first one starts in the Azores. And having never been to Azores, I absolutely had to go to the Azores. So I went with a bicycle and stayed on
Yeah.
one island and discovered some really wonderful things. So that's for a European local, still local travel, even though it's out in the middle of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
And
Now,
and people I met there had gone there by boat, sailed there.
oh,
It's
okay.
very common. So maybe that's
It's
the
out.
future too. It's sailboats are like donkeys.
Yeah. Yeah, I think at this point, local adventures is what we have to look forward to,
Yeah,
at least until it's going to be a while before we can get, to the point. Well, let's hope we don't get to the point where it was, because really, I think the over tourism in a lot of places was just really terrible.
yeah.
Now, you've had a chance to cycle pretty much everywhere. How did you pick um, Shikoku to be the setting for this novel? How did that come
That's
about?
interesting. Well, Shikoku was a in a long series of bicycle trips, and on one of those, flying home, we flew over Shikoku, and we looked down and we said, "That looks like paradise."
Oh,
It's not. It's the fourth of the big islands, so it's not enormous.
hmm
It's something compact about it. It's very mountainous, which for cycling is exactly what you want. And we
hmm
started reading about it, and we discovered it's a mysterious place. It's a pilgrimage site for the Japanese.
hmm
Kobo Daiichi, who brought uh, esoteric Buddhism to Japan, set up a series of temples there. He also built a temple at Koyasan, um, and he was born in Shikoku, and he set up 88 temples in Shikoku, and the
Wow.
Japanese go there as a pilgrimage,
Yeah.
and they go
Yeah.
from temple to temple, and
Oh.
it's a very long way, and a lot of people walk it, and so there's a spiritual mystery about Shikoku, but there's also a lot of traditional architecture,
hmm
traditional food, and this interface between the ocean and the mountain is it's everywhere. It's always present. And one side of Shikoku is facing the Atlantic, and the other side is facing the Seto Sea. And the
Oh.
Seto Sea is the inland sea. There are
Yeah.
700 islands in it.
Wow.
And so, if you want to go to Shikoku, and this is what happens in the novel, you can go via the Shimanami Kaido, which is a series of islands that are connected by bridges that takes you from Honshu to Shikoku. And you could spend a month just doing that. You can do it
Wow.
in a day if you want to take the regular bicycle route. And you
Mm,
could start in Onomichi, which is in Honshu, and rent a bicycle and then leave it in Shikoku when you
mhm.
finish. And on the
Wow.
Shikoku side, there is a bicycle hotel, which is very comfortable and very very nice. It's a hostel, and
Wow.
so it's one of the very few really organized bicycle routes in Japan. And so that turned out just to be a very rich introduction. It's
Yeah.
going someplace is all about being there, but it's also all about getting there.
Yes.
And the getting there is like it's the introduction.
Yeah.
And the Shimanami Kaido, in fact, I'm looking at a picture of it right now that's on the wall, a long panorama of a piece of it. The Seto Sea is calm because it's protected by Shikoku from the
Oh,
Pacific.
uh-huh.
And there is a whole culture on these islands, a fishing culture. And since there's 700 islands and some of them are
Mhm.
uninhabited,
Yeah.
um, it's um, it's isolated. It's a throwback into another century, and all of this was controlled by pirates for a long time.
Wow.
And
Huh.
so there are vestiges of that. And so we started in Onomichi, and this is what happens in the novel. The first part of the novel is a travel log. And
Yes.
so I recount with other characters, obviously. I recount this wonderful discovery of the Seto Sea through these islands that are connected by fabulous, beautiful suspension bridges and the bike route. So the bridges have bike paths on them, and
Mhm.
then there's a regular
Yes.
bike route. But if you go off that route, then you make crazy discoveries. For instance, we saw you got a local map of the tourist office, which is in Japanese, of course, in
Of course.
Onomichi, and it showed on the second island that there were statues. So we headed for that,
Mhm.
and we discovered something that would be a World Heritage site in anywhere else in the world, but in Japan, it's just a normal thing.
It's
A whole
just yeah.
mountaintop was turned into a statue park in the 19th century by
Yeah.
a Buddhist monk and an assistant, and it's all about Buddhism. And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of granite statues, all carved by hand,
That's
and
great.
they're sublime works of art. They're outdoors, and from there you have view of the Seto Sea and all of these islands and the suspension bridges, and it's it was a discovery. and
It sounds amazing.
and the whole Shimanami Kaido was every island was a discovery. So we stayed mostly off the main path, and we
Yeah.
and so that's in the novel.
In the novel, yeah.
And
I started reading it. I just have to
you
say
did.
that I am really enjoying it so far. I thought I would read a couple of chapters of it, but I found myself I read like 100 pages in one sitting,
You're
which is a
kidding.
lot for me because
Wow,
no, I'm
thank
not
you for
kidding.
saying that.
I'm on page 102.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
It was a really good novel, and I was just like, the character, the girl, I just like to write from the start because I was so like, and well, I don't want to give anything away, but as far as like how she dealt, with the ex boyfriend, and I'm just like, oh, okay, cool. She wasn't planning on being this badass, but she was
Yeah, she's
really.
badass. She evolves.
Yeah.
She evolves a lot, and there are a lot of things about her you don't know yet. And in
Oh, that's
fact, it
great
takes 4 novels to begin to discover who she
to
really
begin
is.
to discuss.
And
Yeah,
she's there on the
I am
4
looking
novels.
forward
Yeah,
to
she's a real
reading
person.
more.
She's a real person for me.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
she
that's
she
great.
exists
That's
in my
fantastic.
life as much as anybody I've known.
Yeah.
And so when you finish Shikoku, send me an email. I'll send you the manuscript for the follow up, which is
Okay, that sounds great. I will
Serendipity.
serendipity.
And,
That's
instead of
fantastic.
a bicycle trip, each novel starts with a travel log. Instead of the bicycle trip, it's a kayak trip down
Oh,
The Loire River in France. And this is a
wow.
place that we've it's about 600 kilometers of kayaking, and that we've done. And so uh, this tells that story of kayaking that
Yeah.
river. and
It sounds awesome.
that's how. And you camp. You don't have you can camp. It's full of islands. It's easy kayaking with some
Yeah.
surprises here and there. But the Loire River is famous for parts of it are famous for its castles, its palaces that were built in the 16th and 17th centuries. And so there's a lot of
Ah,
interesting tourism you can do, but it's also
yeah.
very wild. So you free camp on islands,
Yeah.
and you stop in a village and you buy some stuff to make dinner, and you find a secluded island with a beach, and you set up your tent and you build a fire, and you watch the sun go down. And I'm looking at pictures of that on my wall as well.
Yeah.
And you build a fire and you just watch the light changing and the reflections on the water. And if you
Oh.
go to YouTube, I made
Mhm.
a video of kayaking on the Loire. And so just look for my name
Yeah.
plus Loire,
That's
and
great.
you
So
get a
yeah,
feeling
people,
for
you
it.
got to look it up.
So that's the beginning of Serendipity, the second novel, and
That's
that novel takes place in France and in
wow.
Paris, and in deep into the culture of Paris, which is now moribund.
Mm.
A lot of things take place in the opera and take place in the Cirque d'hiver, the winter circus.
I am
Um,
so looking forward to it. I've always wanted to go to the opera in Paris.
oh,
Passing by it, I'm like, I gotta go in there. I gotta take a tour or something, but I never did go. But it's very lovely. But I gotta ask you one
yeah,
question.
sure.
Did you really have a tea ceremony at the Katsura Imperial Villa, or is it just fiction?
That is a very good question. It was no, but
Oh, good.
no,
I
no,
feel better. No,
no,
just kidding.
no. I imagined that, but that tea ceremony is a real tea ceremony. It's fragments of other tea ceremonies.
Yeah.
The Japanese would spontaneously invite us on the first bicycle trip we took, which was on Awaji Island. I was working in Kobe
Hmm.
for 4.5 months at the university, and it's very hard to get away when you're working at a university in
Hmm.
Japan because there are no weekends. But we managed to steal a weekend, and we biked on Awaji, which is where the big Kobe earthquake started. And
Ah.
just to give you a tea ceremony example, which is built into that one, we biked into a village and we heard koto music, the Japanese zither-like instrument, and
Hmm.
so we went, followed the sound, and we came to a temple, and there were two women in kimonos on the front of the temple playing duo koto, and there were
Wow.
seats, and so we sat down. It was a concert. We sat down,
Yeah.
and then the concert ended, and someone came up and invited us to go with them. We didn't know what it was about, but we went with them, and they invited us to a tea ceremony, which was just
Wow.
stunning. It was so beautiful. It was part of our learning about tea ceremonies,
Yeah.
and the tea ceremony you're asking about was part of was didn't happen, but the tea
Uh-huh.
house, we visited the tea house, and if you
Nice.
apply to you can take a tour, but you have to apply and be accepted of the gardens.
Yeah, I wasn't. I applied and I didn't get it. I guess I didn't have the influence.
We had the influence because we applied with a Japanese friend who was a
Ah,
professor of sociology at Kobe, and
yeah.
that might have had an effect. I don't know. So you tried to go there. That's wonderful. I didn't know
Yes, I
that
tried.
people
I
knew about
tried.
it. Wow, you're really well. Try again. Try again. It's really worth it.
Yeah, well, next time we go, I definitely will. I was so disappointed. I think we left it a little too late.
Oh, could
Also,
be. Yeah.
I'm thinking, oh yeah, they made it sound as if you could just apply and it would be done. And I applied, I think, like 3 or 4 months before we went. But I think it's like a
Oh,
really long months thing because they really make sure that you get the best experience. So when they turned me down, I'm like, okay. But they did it so nicely. The rejection was so good
oh,
that you
really?
couldn't feel bad about it.
Well, I must say I'm impressed because I didn't know anything about it until this sociologist friend told us about it and suggested we go together. And he said, as a visiting professor, we'll have more chance.
Exactly.
And
You
and
definitely had the chops.
and he was really thrilled, and we were really thrilled. It was as described in the book. It was a magical moment, and I just
Wow.
imagined that as part of this wedding, someone with great influence could organize a tea ceremony in the tea house.
That is so awesome. I'm so enjoying the book so far. So, anybody who's listening to this podcast, you really need to get yourself a copy of this book called Shikoku by David Tepfer. It's available on Amazon. And what other platforms is it available on, David?
Barnes and Noble.
Oh, so you can go and get it, and it's a fun read, especially if you love the outdoors and you love cycling. I was all like reading, going, "I need to get myself one of these really lightweight bikes instead cycling," and that takes a lot for me because I am so not into exercise, you know. So I was really like, "Oh, I could do this," you know. But it really starts up your imagination, which is really good.
Cycling can be done by anybody because you don't have to go hundreds of kilometers in a day. You
It's
can go,
true,
you can,
as she definitely showed us,
right.
right?
You don't have to be a racer. And the image of road biking is always Tour de France road
Yes,
biking racing. It's not that at all. There's a whole bicycle touring culture, and you can do that on a lightweight bicycle. You just have to take almost no luggage with you.
yeah.
We travel with biking clothes only, no extra clothes, just biking shoes, and
Wow.
just the bare minimum, which is how I went to the Seoul Opera in Korea in biking clothes.
That's
And, and no
oh,
one's
that must it
no,
must have drawn some looks.
no, not at all.
No?
No, because when you want to dress up in Korea, you wear sports clothes, including biking clothes.
Ah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's high fashion, and Korea is
Oh,
one of our
wow.
favorite places to cycle because they've made bicycle only roads, and there's one that starts in the far south and goes all the way through Seoul to the coast. And we spent 11 days doing it, but you could do it in
Mhm.
much less. But we were really absorbing the backwoods of Korea and enjoying every minute of it. But it's great
Yeah,
cycling because it's just you and the road,
that's
and you
great.
see other people when you go through a town, but otherwise you
Uh-huh.
don't. And
You don't.
it's really wild.
Wow.
It's
Be a nice place to be with yourself and, think and
Yeah,
have clarity.
clarity, and the lodging is a completely crazy thing because
Yeah.
most of the hotels in Korea that we saw have been converted to love hotels.
Oh, love hotels.
Love hotels. And so we
Okay.
discovered love hotels. We couldn't figure out what was going on with these things. And we ran on this quite long trip on the Four Rivers bicycle path. We encountered two foreigners. One was an Irishman going the other way, and he lived in Korea, and he explained. And so the hotels have been converted to love hotels, which means it's a place where couples go for a tryst,
Ah,
and
but
you can
so
rent a
it's not a
room.
hooker place, right? It's
No,
just
not at
couples.
all. It's just
Oh,
couples.
okay. That's
Not at all. No, quite the
oh,
contrary.
okay.
It's a love experience, and the rooms are incredibly inexpensive, and you can stay for an hour, you can stay for a night. I think it's practically the same price.
Oh,
But
wow.
when you go in, you don't want to be seen, so you go in through a curtain. So you on a bicycle in a car that it's these things hanging down. On a bicycle, you go through this thing that looks sort of like a forest of hanging stuff,
Hmm.
you go in, and in the more elaborate ones, you see a garage. You go into a garage, and there are doors, garage doors, and you find one that's open. You go in, you push a button, and the door closes, and you're inside this garage. And there's a staircase, and you go up the top of the staircase, and there is a machine, and you put your credit card in, and you pay for everything, and you get the
Wow.
key to the and it opens up the door to your room. And the rooms are um, it's hard to describe. They have, in English, love poems written on the walls. They have the biggest jacuzzi I've ever seen and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you get a kit. Always get a kit of things that you might need during this experience. Um, for the simpler ones, you actually have contact with someone when you go in, but you don't see them. There's just someone behind a
Behind it.
opaque thing, and there's the hole, and they hand you stuff, and you hand them the money.
Huh.
And
So then you go back out and find your partner and then come back up?
well, you go in there with your partner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you go in there with your partner, but you don't want to be seen by the locals because they'll recognize your car, In our case, there was no
Ah.
danger of that. And so this got to be quite an experience. At one point, love hotels are great for the first few nights, but after a week, uh, and you've been biking all day, it's not exactly
You
what you
just
have.
want to. Where are the sleep hotels?
They're just, I need some food, I need a
Yeah,
bed.
exactly.
There are limits. There are limits.
The re-energizer hotel is what you
Right? Yeah,
need.
what you need is
Oh, that's too
more
funny. That's
rest and less recreation. And so we started in one town. We started looking for a hotel, and we finally found an old fashioned hotel, but it was really difficult. They'd all been converted to love hotels,
I love hotels. That's too funny. That
and
sounds great. I think you could do a whole book about that, just that.
oh, I think people must be there must be a guide to love hotels in Korea. And they're very garish on the outside. They're
Oh,
full
I
of
could just
neon, and
imagine.
it's crazy. You can see them from a mile, and they're often groups of like 3 or 4 of them in the same place. And
That's
Korea
great.
turned out to be wonderful, wonderful cycling
Oh,
because of this road, which cycle road. It really is a road that follows the river systems, and at
mm,
times the path is out on pillars, out in the water, so you feel like you're floating over the water.
that's
And
fantastic.
one just to give you an idea of what it's like in backwoods Korea, we got into after a long, long day, and a long day of cycling. You might be wet, but certainly you're physically tired, and uh, your ass hurts. I mean, it hurts. Everything hurts,
Everything hurts.
and they're great for the jacuzzi and the massage, but what you really need is food. And
Yeah.
so in this tiny village, there were like 3 love hotels, and we picked one, but there was only one restaurant, and there was kind of a newsstand, a, sort of a little tiny store. And so we went to the restaurant, we sat down, and it smelled intense in there, intense,
Mm.
because the Koreans live on garlic.
Oh, yeah, it's
I
true.
mean, it really reeked of garlic. And so we
Yeah.
sat down, and the man came, and we were sitting on low tables, like in Japan, and a man came and talked to us in some primitive but usable English, and said that all they only serve one thing in the restaurant, and that's fish soup. And the other
Hmm.
thing the Koreans are able to eat in a way that was just impossible for us is they can stand peppery foods, hot,
Mm.
spicy food. And I thought I
Mm.
was good at that, from
Yeah.
India and places like that.
Yeah.
But no, this is way off scale. I mean, you get this
Wow.
stuff anywhere near your face, and your eyes start to water, and your nose burns. It's just emits radioactive pepper.
Wow.
And at that point, we were well into this trip. We just had a terrible time finding something to eat because
Mm-hmm.
everything was so peppery or
Was so
so
spicy.
garlicky. And
Wow.
so when we realized what this soup was, we said, we just can't. But we were really hungry, and we just can't do it. And he was very apologetic, and so
Yeah.
we went across the street to this newsstand, and they had some biscuits, and we were going to have
Yeah.
biscuits for dinner.
This
And
that was dinner.
we are buying the biscuits, and he came up behind us and tapped us on the shoulder and beckoned us to go back in the restaurant. And his mother had prepared a dinner for us.
A pepperless.
Pepperless, and no garlic, no pepper,
That's
and it
great.
was so sweet, just incredibly sweet. And so we actually ended up refueling, which is
Yeah,
what you need. And
exactly.
and he they wouldn't let us pay for it. There was just no way they would let us
Oh,
pay for it. It was
that's
just
great.
just this is the kind of kindness you encounter in adventure travel when you're
What?
lost and you really
Yeah,
don't know what you're doing. And humans are, for the most part, incredibly generous and concerned
yeah.
about other humans.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing the story. I am so loving the book, and I just
Oh,
can't
I'm
wait to
thrilled that
finish
you're
it.
reading
And
it. I'm really thrilled.
now, David, tell me something before I let you go.
Yeah,
I know I promised you just 40 minutes or so, but I have to ask you: did you find writing the book was it cathartic for you? Like, did it bring you joy?
yeah. It created a whole existence that I didn't know about that was in me, and I started writing this book was written in 2012. Actually, it's I didn't want to try publishing until I was well into the series. It'll be one long novel. It's
Mm-hmm.
coming out in pieces, and it was just a few weeks after coming back from this trip to Shikoku,
Mm-hmm.
that having dinner in a restaurant, and my son said, "Okay, you retired. I just retired. I retired the
Mm-hmm.
day before we went to Shikoku. You just
Wow.
retired. So, what are you going to do to justify your existence?" And I have a very interesting son. Anyway,
Yeah.
so we're in a restaurant. We had quite a bit to drink, and so I just said the first thing that came to my head, which is I'm going to write a novel, which was not true. I had no intention of writing a novel, but I just sort of it came to me. And so
Committed.
he got very excited. I could see he was a bit worried about this. And so he said, "Okay, what's it about?" And I said, first thing that came to my head was, um, it's about a man like me who just retired, and uh, he becomes a gigolo. He becomes a gigolo for young women
Uh-huh.
who are in love with their father.
Oh my God. I can't wait. What was his reaction?
Well, first of all, my wife was a bit shocked. I could see her out the corner of, and it stopped him. We have this relationship, father son
Yeah.
relationship. It's more, in many ways, a brother brother relationship. We're fairly
Yeah.
competitive. So
Yeah.
it stopped him, and he leaned really close to me. He said, "That's a really interesting subject. You've got to write that novel."
Oh,
And I had
there
no
you go.
intention of writing a novel. I thought he would
Yeah.
forget about this, but he would not let go of it, and he bothered me for weeks. And finally, one day, I just opened my computer and I started writing, and all this stuff came flowing out. I'd done a lot of science writing. I was a scientist, and
Uh-huh.
which was very difficult when you're writing original
Yeah.
research papers. It's very dense, and this was just so easy in comparison. And so there
Yeah.
was a lot of preformed. I think in my brain there was the story was had been collecting all my life maybe,
Yeah.
and the the male protagonist is a poet,
Yeah.
and so this relationship which forms between him and a much younger woman
Yeah.
is expressed on his side in poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's unusual in that the book is not only a travel log plus a novel, but it's also integrates poetry, his poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And the poetry of the book I actually had written before, and I have a
Uh-huh.
feeling I maybe wrote the book structured around the poetry,
Around the
that it
That
was
makes
back in
sense.
my head someplace. And these
It makes
characters just
sense.
came out of nowhere. I had no idea who they were or where they were, and they just sort of introduced themselves into my life, and it just and it's still happening. I'm
Mm.
writing the fourth novel now, and when I feel it's right, I sit down, and there
Yeah.
they are. They just come. They just appear, and it's not quite like taking dictation, but almost.
Yeah.
So after science, it's a very natural and comforting place for me to go, where I'm very surprised by the things that happen. I don't see them coming, and it really, as it's a cliche, but it really comes out of the characters once they're
Yeah.
there, and I'm still discovering who they are. And
That's great.
the composer friend just composed a series of songs from some of the poems in Shikoku, which will
Wow.
be published and performed and recorded. And so I'm really thrilled
Fantastic.
about that,
Yeah.
because
That's great.
music is very present in Shikoku.
Yeah.
You're probably not at that point where it starts,
Yes.
and
Yes.
in serendipity, it is really the subject. So I won't give away the plot, obviously,
No.
but
Everybody go out and buy a copy of this one so you can keep up with the adventures of Sarah and the Professor Poet.
right, he has a name in the second book, but I don't give him a name in the first book.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, it's the Professor Poet. And just like, where you mentioned about the story where you told your son, I'm thinking, oh. Okay, so are you going to go back to that in the very beginning, just before
It's there.
he retired? Like, I thought maybe one of the girls in the class was going to like.
The theme was there. It's part of the tapestry, but it's not
Okay.
not always evident. But
Okay.
it's an interesting question. It's a very interesting question for a man. Um, it was probably maybe the only somewhat conflict that we had in the early phases of our marriage. It took me a while to convince my wife that I was not her father. And one day I
Who the book is dedicated to, by the way.
yes, and it was one of the it was finally I got smart and I just said it. I said, "Look, that's not going to happen." So maybe that's where the idea came
That's where it
from. I
comes
don't
from.
know,
Yeah.
but it's a fascinating relationship, and Freud had a lot to say about that.
Yeah.
But for a woman to really fall in love with a man, she has to give up that that love
Notion.
affair, that love
Yeah.
affair with her father.
Yeah.
It's very interesting stuff.
Hmm. Well, I definitely think everybody listening to this would really enjoy it. So, once again,
Thank
you
you,
can find the
Kim Kim.
book on Amazon, and it's called Shikoku, and it's by David Tepfer. So, run out there, get a copy. David, thank you so much
Oh,
for
you're
being on
welcome.
this
I'm
show.
so
This was
happy you're reading
fun.
the book. I'm thrilled.
I
It's
I
easy
love
to
it.
write a book. It's very hard to get people to read it.
It's true. And I'm just like, and after I read it, I'm going to put my opinion on Amazon too.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much again, David. I really
Wonderful.
enjoy talking to you. And
Me too.
everybody listening, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. It's been great.